Hey, welcome back to another TouchDesigner tutorial. I'm super excited to launch a new ElevenLabs plugin for TouchDesigner, and it allows you to really easily do text-to-speech with no setup. This is an example that allows you to really easily combine a bunch of different AI models. So I'm combining Whisper, ChatGPT, and ElevenLabs, as well as MediaPipe, so that I can make this whole chatbot. How's it going?
Oh, just peachy. As long as you don't ask me to solve any mysteries, we should be fine.
What advice would you give to the TouchDesigner community for building an AI chatbot?
Yes, because when I think of expert advice, I immediately turn to the TouchDesigner community for all my AI chatbot inquiries. They must be busy playing around with nodes and blending shaders to bother with such trivial things.
So for this example, I'm combining Whisper to do speech to text, and then I'm passing that along to ChatGPT to basically prompt it. And I've basically given this a character and kind of given it some initial prompts for who the character is. And once a response has been generated, I'm passing that into the ElevenLabs component to generate the audio. From there, the audio is sent over, and I can analyze kind of the strength of the audio to change the shape of the mouth. And then I'm also using the MediaPipe plugin to track my face. And then that way, as I move around, the character actually tracks my location. I kind of wanted to make it look like it was actually looking at me. So I'm going to break this tutorial into 4 parts. For part 1, I'm going to show you how to use the ElevenLabs plugin and some of the behind the scenes for it. For part 2, I'm going to show you how to connect the ChatGPT component to the ElevenLabs component. So that way, if you generate a new prompt, you can actually take that text and then turn it into speech. For part 3, I'm going to actually show you how to use the Whisper component, but what we need to do is actually make sure that Whisper isn't detecting audio while the chatbot is responding. So it's a little bit of finessing there that we'll have to do. And then for part 4, I'm going to show you how to use the MediaPipe plugin to track a person's face and then change the position of the 3D model so that it actually makes it look like it's looking at you. So a couple things to note. I actually have a previous tutorial that shows how to use the Whisper and the ChatGPT plugins. And if you haven't checked that out, I'm going to put a link to it in the description. Please take a moment to watch that tutorial first because it's going to show you how to put in the OpenAI API key to get those working. To generate the face on the talking scone, I actually followed a tutorial from Noto the Talking Ball. It's a really amazing tutorial, so I'm not going to show specifically how to do that. And if you want to learn how to do that approach, I'll put a link to Noto's tutorial in the description as well. Overall, I'm going to show the general approach to make this whole project. And lastly, I'm going to have the components and this entire project file available in my Patreon. So I'll put a link to that in the description as well. All right, let's go ahead and dive into it. Okay, so the first thing we're going to want to do is head on over to the ElevenLabs website and go ahead and make an account over here on the sign in and sign up page. And you will need to enter in credit card information in order to generate your API key. So I'm going to go ahead and sign in. And once you're signed in, the interface looks like this. So we can write any type of text and generate some speech from it.
Hello.
And then you also have access to your different voices over here. One thing I want to note as well is that you can change some of the different voice settings, and all of these are sliders that I put into the component. You can also add in voices that the community have added into ElevenLabs. So if I go into the voices tab over here, you can see that I'm using this one called Brian, which is an old male British accent. And here, if I go over to the voice library, I can kind of scroll down pretty far actually, and I should be able to find that similar one. It's like an old male British voice somewhere in here. I'll let you find it. But basically, there it is. You can just sample it, and then you can also click the little plus button to add it into your library. And the last thing I want to show you is how to generate an API key, because this is what we're going to use to activate the component. To get to the API key, you're going to click on your profile in the bottom corner, and then click on the Profile plus API key. Then you're going to reveal this special code. You're going to copy that and bring it over to the TouchDesigner project. And here in the ElevenLabs component, at the very top, this section right here is for your API key. So there's actually a couple different modes that are available for the model. And Right now I'm using Turbo because I want to get the fastest responses possible, but there's also multilingual, English, and then they have their V1 and V2 models. So definitely play around with those. And if you've added a custom voice into the model, this is the list of voices that are available, but Brian's not going to show up automatically. So here you can fetch new voice options. And if we run this, it'll take a minute and it might reset your model ID, but go ahead and set it back to the turbo mode for now, just so we get a quick response. And then you should see the list of all the different speech models that are available. So we'll select Brian. You have the option to save the audio as it gets generated. So here, basically in my TouchDesigner project, what I've done is I've saved a folder right here called audio. And then as the model generates the audio, I get a local file that's saved every single time. One thing to note is that for the folder path, if you just select the folder, for example, if I go in and I want to save it to the audio folder, it doesn't add this slash at the end, and you need to add it in order for it to save it into that folder. So we'll tack that in. And then the last little pieces here are where the audio gets played back from. So here, by default, it's just playing back through our default sound output, and then you can select your device here for where you want the audio to play. The last thing are the two other parameters that are available on the voice model for how stable you want it or how much it should boost the similarity between the actual words. And then to generate the actual audio, you can just click this Generate Audio button. You can see right now we're actually bringing in the text from the GPT model. So here you can type in anything, and once we type in that text, you can hit Generate.
Hello.
And it'll play the audio back. And the other thing to note is that as you generate new audio, it will use up the total number of tokens, but I've set it up so that it will actually display how many tokens you have left for however much you've paid for your subscription. So that shows up here. The other piece is that the raw audio that gets generated is output right here as the first output of the plugin. The second output is going to be related to any errors that happen. So you can read those. And then the last chop data here is indicating whether or not it's still loading, and then if there are any errors that have happened. All right, part two. We're going to set up ChatGPT so that once it finishes generating its text, it will pass that along to the ElevenLabs component and then tell it to generate the audio. The first thing I want to do is actually get a reference to the text that ChatGPT has output and put it into the ElevenLabs component. So here, instead of just writing in our text manually, what we can do is get a reference to this GPT response. And we can write in a little expression for that. So, there it is. We can do operator GPT underscore response dot text for any text dot. And now we can see that we're getting this output. The next thing that we want to do is figure out how to generate and click this pulse button programmatically. So I'm going to, on the side here, just as a test, put down this little text dot. We want to get a reference to this ElevenLabs component. So I'll get operator, I'll just copy the name of it, ElevenLabs. And then we want to get a parameter, .par, dot, and what's the name of it? It's called capital generate, G-E-N-E. And then in order to trigger a pulse button, we can call .pulse. And so I'll take this out of inactive mode and I will right click and hit run script. And now,
Oh, the classic ha ha ha.
okay, so we can see, okay, so we can see that it's generating. And then now what we want to do is that once ChatGPT has finished generating its text, we want to run this. So I'm going to copy this little script and delete the text dot. And I'll delete this example because we're going to just recreate it. But basically, over here on the ChatGPT component, this chop tells us whether or not it is finished loading. So we can right click here and place down a DAT, which is going to be a chop execute. And this is basically an event listener. And what we can do here is select in the channels the loading channel. And really what we want is to listen when the loading goes from on to off so that it's finished loading. So we're going to turn on this event listener from on to off. We don't need the value change. And now in here on the on to off, we'll put in that little Python code. So then it'll trigger our button. All right, let's test that out. I will just generate a response here. We can see. Oh.
You're really milking those ha-ha-has for all they're worth, aren't you? Comedy gold right here.
Okay. And cool. Okay, that wraps up part 2. All right, part 3. So what we want to do is configure the Whisper plugin, which is responsible for taking the microphone input and converting it into text. And we want to set it up so that it only records audio when a person is speaking. But we want to make sure that it doesn't pick up the audio from the ElevenLabs component. So the main reason is that it'd be nice to just have it continuously recording, but we do need to toggle that on and off. So what we're going to do, I'm going to put this Whisper component to just a regular mode so that we can toggle it on and off. And I'm going to delete this part of the network that's responsible for the audio activation for turning this part on and off. Okay, let's go ahead and start with the first part, where we're going to detect if someone is speaking. So an easy way to do that is to just analyze the incoming microphone input, and we're going to look at what is the max value that's getting output. So we can put down an analyze chop, and we're going to take the maximum. And from here, what we want to do is we're actually just going to pick a specific value. So this is going to change on your environment. If you're in a pretty loud environment and there's a lot of background noise, or if there's multiple people speaking, it might be a little bit difficult for this to work correctly. But if you're in a relatively quiet environment, I think this will work great. So when I'm not speaking, we can see I've got a value kind of below 0.01. So anything above 0.1 is going to work for us. And what we can do is we basically want to turn this into a value that's going to be 0 or 1 to toggle on and off the recording for Whisper. And the way that we can do that, let's convert this into a value for ourselves. So I'm going to use an expression which will allow us to write a Boolean operation. So we can say, all right, is this value greater than 0.1? While I'm not talking, it is below it, and then while I am talking, it is at 1. But you'll notice that it kind of keeps triggering on and off. It's not very helpful for us because we want it to stay continuously recording. So what we can do is we can apply a lag, which will kind of add a delay to it. Maybe I'll bump it up to like 0.7 or something like that. And from here, what we can do is set it up so that if this lag is anywhere above 0, then it will automatically become a value of 1. And then after the lag has gone all the way down to 0, then it will be 0. So that way we kind of have a larger window where the recording happens, because maybe someone pauses for a little bit while they're talking. So we can put down a limit, and we can go into quantize, and we're going to take this and do a ceiling, but do the step value of 1. So that way, until this lag reaches all the way to 0, it's going to stay at 1. There we go. So that gives us a nice little window where we're able to have that value at 1. And already we can take this and put a null down, and we can just pass this onto our Whisper component and set this as recording audio. So this is going to generate audio whenever someone's talking, and then once I finish talking, it should turn off. All right. I have the actual ElevenLabs thing just muted right now. All right, so for the second part, what we want to do is determine if there's audio getting output from the ElevenLabs component, and if it is, we want to prevent the Whisper model from detecting audio. So a simple way of doing that is by actually using a logic chop. And this control flow, what we're going to do is connect another chop, just as an example for now. So I'll put down a constant, for example, and connect this as our second operator. What we can do is combine the chops together using an AND operation. And so what that means is that both inputs need to be 1 in order for the output signal to be 1. If either one of them are 0, the output will still be 0. And so what that allows us to do is we can set this signal up so if the ElevenLabs component is outputting audio, we're going to set this channel to 0 so that if the microphone's also going, it won't be recording. But if the ElevenLabs component isn't outputting audio, we're going to have it set to 1, which will allow the microphone detection to go through. So for that, I'll show you if I turn the microphone detection on. You can see now that the channel audio is going through and our output we're recording, but then what we'll do is we'll set this second value to 0 once we know that there's output coming from the text to speech, and that will prevent the signal from going through. Okay, so let's just set up a little network for ourselves then to accomplish the same thing. So what we can do is we can look at the audio output here and kind of do something similar. All right, so why don't we do this? We're going to take the same configuration that we've done with the analyze, expression, and lag and limit, and we're going to duplicate that. And we're going to instead pass in the output from our ElevenLabs component. So the main difference here is that what we're going to want to do is set this to with a math at the end, and we want to reverse it. So instead of it going from 0 to 1, we want it to go from 1 to 0. So that way, when it's quiet, it's going to be a value of 1, and then once the audio is playing, it's going to be a value of 0. So we'll connect these two together. So now you can see that while I'm talking, that's working great. The audio is going through and the record is on for this. But then if I go over to the ElevenLabs component, if I just cue the audio, so I already had audio generated, if I cue this, you can see immediately it turns this off, and we can see that it's not detecting any of the audio. Cool, and why don't we just add a little annotation for ourselves. So this is our audio analysis, and the easiest thing to do is turn off active for ourselves when we want the microphone just fully off. But hopefully this should work for your setup, and the main things to take into account are the expression here. So if you're in a slightly louder environment, maybe increase that a little bit and play around with it. The other part too is the lag. So you might want to have a larger window for someone to speak before it turns off the recording. So here what we could do is we can maybe increase the lag to a value of 1. Actually, you're going to want to set it as the second parameter because that's when the value is decreasing. So here we'll make this a larger value. So now it's recording audio. You can see that, and then when we stop talking, that's way too long. Okay, so maybe not all the way up to 1 second, maybe like 0.4. Okay, that feels a little bit better. That feels like closer to what we actually want. Even that still feels a little too long. Maybe like 0.25. Cool. All right, so for part 4, if you haven't seen my tutorial on the MediaPipe plugin, I'm going to put a link to that in the description. Definitely go ahead and check that out first. It's going to show you all the ins and outs of getting that plugin set up. We're going to take a look at how to use MediaPipe to track the face position, specifically our nose, and use that to change the position of the 3D model to make it look like it's actually looking at you. And I'm not going to go into too much about the setup of the actual scone model. Really, this was just a 3D scan that I was able to download for free, and it is a USD model that all I'm doing is changing the rotation of. And so we're able to kind of just leverage the general kind of like render setup in TouchDesigner. I will say that the process here of kind of creating this face, this is from the Note of the Talking Ball tutorial. So again, I'll link to that in the description if you want to check that out. And really all I'm doing is I have this kind of final face that's output here, and I'm piping that into the 3D model. And over here in the materials, you can see that I'm basically just overlaying that texture onto the scone model. So that's how I'm able to display the face. But for this next part, I'm going to show you specifically how to map the MediaPipe component so that we can track the face and move the 3D model around. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and delete the component right here. And let's go ahead and head on over to my GitHub. And I'll put a link to this in the description. So this is a plugin that I co-created with Dom Scott. And we basically took the MediaPipe tools for face, hand, pose tracking, a number of other models, and set it up so you don't really need to install anything in TouchDesigner to just get those models running super quickly. So once you click this little download latest release button, you can open up the zip. This file is going to be if you want to have just a working example, but what we can do here is we can actually just drag in the MediaPipe component, and then specifically the face detector component. So I'll show you what it looks like in my file system. So I usually like to make a toxes folder, and you can see I've dragged in the MediaPipe tox and the face detector tox. And it's really important to keep these files local to your project. And what I mean by that is that here I have this chat agent.toe that's next to our folder. We don't want to just be randomly dragging the file from our downloads. And the reason for that, if I go over to our project, and now when I drag and drop this MediaPipe tox into our project, it's going to have a local file path for it. And by default, if I try to save this project, it's going to be very, very slow, and it's going to take a super long time. And what we want to do to fix that is go into the common section and turn on enable external tox. So now if I save the project, it's going to save very quickly because it's referencing it externally. Let's go ahead and drag in that face detector tox as well. And what we can do here to connect it is to go over to the face detectors, connect that here. Make sure to turn off all of the different models. They're all on by default. And we can also select our webcam right here. So I'm going to turn off the other helper models, and we just want detect faces. So that should show up for us. And now we want to get the second channel output. The first one is used if you want to like instance. So the second one, I'm going to put a null down so you can see this. It can detect up to 10 faces. So in our case, we really just want to detect the first one. So we'll put down a select, and we want to get the nose position. So we can look over here. We want P1's nose tip X. And then we want the same thing, we'll put a space, nose tip Y. Those are the two values that we need. And basically, really, these are just mapped into the scone model. I set up the an environment light in here so that you can actually pass in the webcam, and it will use the lighting from the webcam to light up the model. So it takes on kind of similar environment lights. And what we want to do here is notice that as I move around, it's pretty jumpy. So I'm going to put down a lag and maybe bump this up to like 0.5. And I'm going to put down a filter as well. Kind of combine those and set the filter width a little smaller. And this will kind of smooth the signal out. Cool. So that's set up now. And the one thing I want to point out is just inside this example, all that I'm really doing here is that on this 3D model, again, in the X form section, what I'm doing is taking the TX and the TY positions, and I'm just mapping those onto the rotations to kind of give us some nice values so that as the model moves around, it kind of seems like it's looking at you. And again, the project file is going to be available on my Patreon, so feel free to download this whole example and play around with it. I'm really excited to see what you're going to make using this component. And I wanted to give a huge shout out to everyone who's been supporting me on Patreon for allowing me to be able to make projects like this. I know it's been a minute since I've posted new content, but I've actually been working on a much larger project for the TouchDesigner community that I'm excited to share some details about more soon. If you're interested and want to get updates on it, consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks again. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.